Most people imagine death as quick or peaceful, but sometimes it's the exact opposite. Some people leave this world in ways so brutal, strange, or drawn out that it's hard to believe they're real. In this video, we'll break down 5 true stories of people who died in some of the worst ways ever recorded. Moments where pain, fear, and confusion took over. These are not made-up tales. These are real, and they are disturbing. On March 9, 1994, a tense atmosphere gripped the district court in Euskirchen, a town in the North Rhine-Westphalia region in Germany. Erwin Mikolajczyk, a 39-year-old former bus driver and hospital maintenance worker, had arrived to hear the outcome of his appeal. He had been convicted of physically attacking his ex-girlfriend, a 56-year-old woman named Vera Lemisik. Those who knew him described him as a loner, reserved but polite, with an unsettling interest in firearms. Yet no one in the courthouse that day could have foreseen the calculated brutality he was about to unleash. Erwin had long exhibited troubling behavior. Years earlier, he had been dismissed from his job as a bus driver after an internal scandal revealed he was frequently carrying weapons and behaving aggressively. In 1989, he underwent neurological treatment, and by 1991, his employer had initiated a psychological evaluation. A formal warning was sent to police after a medical report concluded he could become aggressive, especially when armed. One of his brothers had also contacted authorities in 1993, warning that Erwin was dangerous and abnormal. These warnings, however, did not lead to action. Despite known mental health issues and multiple red flags, he legally owned at least 10 firearms and maintained access to explosive materials. The police did nothing. Vera, the woman he had once been in a relationship with, had suffered severe bodily harm at his hands, nearly losing consciousness during one instance. She had pursued legal action, leading to Erwin's conviction, and a fine amounting to 7,200 marks. On the day of the attack, her mother, Agnes Muller, accompanied her to the courthouse along with a friend, Marianne Rubsum. Judge Dr. Alexander Schaefer, just 33 years old, presided over the appeal and upheld the original ruling, finalizing the legal consequences for Erwin. Following the court's decision, Erwin briefly left the building. When he returned, his appearance had changed. He wore a black raincoat, a headband, sunglasses, and, inexplicably, a necklace made of garlic cloves. Hidden beneath his coat was a .45 caliber Colt pistol and a homemade bomb in a backpack. The attack began in the hallway. Erwin approached Vera, embraced her, then pulled the pistol and shot her at point-blank range. He immediately turned the weapon on Agnes and Marianne, killing them both. 2 other people in the hallway, Peter Kurth and Peter Preuss, were also fatally shot. Peter Kurth had been at the courthouse for an unrelated matter, awaiting his turn as a witness. Erwin then stormed back into the courtroom. There, he shot Judge Schaefer, the very man who had affirmed his conviction minutes earlier. Witnesses recalled the chaos. Screams, panic, and blood. Once he emptied his magazine, Erwin removed the bomb from his backpack and activated it. The resulting explosion was devastating. Windows shattered, debris flew across the street, and Erwin's body was expelled from the courtroom, landing outside. The force of the blast mangled several victims beyond recognition. In total, 7 people lost their lives, and 8 others were injured. The aftermath of the massacre was marked by grief and public outrage. Germany observed a national moment of silence for the victims. Criticism quickly turned toward the authorities, especially as it became clear that multiple opportunities to prevent the tragedy had been missed. Officials had been alerted about Erwin's instability, aggression, and weapon ownership on several occasions over the previous few years. Yet no action had been taken to confiscate his firearms or assess the threat he posed. His membership in a shooting society and his ability to legally possess dangerous weapons had gone unchallenged, even after he had changed residences between towns. 30 years later, the attack remains one of the deadliest incidents to occur in a German courtroom. The victims' families continue to live with the consequences of a failure to intervene. For the town of Euskirchen, March 9, 1994, stands as a painful reminder of how deadly an action can be when warnings go unheeded. On April 2, 1993, a small courtroom in Jamestown, California, became the stage for one of the most controversial acts of vigilante justice in modern American history. Elena "Ellie" Nessler, a 40-year-old single mother from San Andreas, entered the Tuolumne County courtroom not only as a witness in a high-profile case related to harming children, but as the mother of one of the alleged victims. Her 6-year-old son William had accused a man named Daniel Mark Driver of horrific acts. The hearing was meant to determine whether there was enough evidence for a full trial, but before the court could proceed, Ellie took justice into her own hands. Both Ellie and Driver came from troubled pasts. Ellie, the eldest of 3 daughters raised in the hill country of Tuolumne County, had learned self-reliance early. Raised in a family that valued strength, faith, and fierce protection of kin, she was described as hardworking and tough, someone who could drive tractors, chop wood, and fix engines. She had married and divorced early, later partnering with a miner named Bill Nesler. Together, they had a son, William, and moved to Liberia in search of opportunity. After Civil War broke out, Ellie returned to California with her children, living modestly and relying on welfare and manual labor. In 1988, Daniel Driver entered the Nesler family's life under the guise of religious faith and community service. A dishwasher at a Christian summer camp, he was a familiar face to many local families. But beneath the surface was a deeply disturbing history. Driver had previously pleaded guilty when charged for harmful behavior involving young boys in the San Jose area. Despite his past, he had been granted probation, largely due to letters of support from his church community. That decision would have lasting consequences. Not long after William returned from camp, family members began noticing troubling changes in his behavior. Months later, during a sleepover, he confided in his aunt that Driver had harmed him. Ellie reported the allegations to authorities, but by then, Driver had left the area. For the next several years, Ellie remained on alert, spotting Driver's yellow Buick near her son's school and witnessing William's emotional deterioration. Eventually, Driver was arrested on unrelated charges in Palo Alto and brought back to face charges involving William and several other boys. By the day of the court hearing, Ellie was reportedly at her breaking point. Her son, now 11, was visibly ill with anxiety and vomiting as he waited to testify. When Driver entered the courtroom, he reportedly smirked at the boy, a gesture that infuriated Ellie. Tensions were already high, with reports suggesting that the children's testimony was faltering and that Driver might escape prosecution. During a court recess, Ellie re-entered the room and took a seat behind Driver, who sat shackled beside his attorney. Without warning, she pulled a .25 caliber semi-automatic pistol from her purse and fired 5 bullets into the back of Driver's head and neck. He died instantly. The room erupted into chaos. Law enforcement immediately subdued Ellie and placed her under arrest. She was charged with first-degree murder. Public reaction was swift and polarized. Some hailed her as a mother pushed beyond endurance. Others saw her as a dangerous vigilante. Media outlets descended on Jamestown while locals printed bumper stickers reading, "Nice shooting, Ellie." Supporters donated more than $40,000 to her legal defense, and a television movie was later made about the case. But within weeks, toxicology reports revealed that Ellie had illegal substances in her system at the time of the shooting. The revelation shattered the sympathetic image carefully crafted by her defense. In the following months, Ellie's legal case moved through trial and appeals. She ultimately pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and was sentenced to 10 years in prison, 6 for the killing and 4 for the use of a firearm. She served 3.5 years before being released in 1997. Her post-prison life remained troubled. In 2002, she was convicted of offenses related to illegal substances and sentenced to 6 more years. She was released in 2006 and died 2 years later from breast cancer at the age of 56. Ellie's son William, deeply affected by the trauma and raised by relatives during her incarceration, later faced serious legal troubles of his own. In 2005, he was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison for killing a man during a dispute. The killing in the Jamestown courtroom left a mark on the national conversation about justice, revenge, and the limits of the legal system. It was a tragedy born not only of mistreatment and trauma, but also of systemic failure, one that continues to provoke debate decades later. It began as a simple court proceeding in the historic downtown of Tyler, Texas. Maribel Estrada, a 41-year-old mother of 3, was scheduled to attend a child support hearing alongside her eldest son, David Jr. Calm, and reserved. Maribel worked hard to support her children after her 2004 divorce, and despite the stress of legal proceedings, she showed no signs of fear that morning. But as she climbed the courthouse steps with her son, a nightmare unfolded in broad daylight. David Hernandez Arroyo Sr., Maribel's ex-husband, had arrived at the courthouse earlier that day. He was angry over the child support dispute and had parked nearby, waiting in ambush. Wearing a military flak jacket and bulletproof vest, and armed with a Chinese-made Type 56S rifle, an AK-47-style semi-automatic, he waited until Maribel and their 23-year-old son approached the rear entrance of the courthouse. Without warning, he opened fire. Maribel was killed instantly with a single shot to the head. David Jr., attempting to protect his mother and mediate as he had many times before, was shot in the leg. His attempt to calm a deteriorating situation had ended in tragedy. As both collapsed to the ground, chaos erupted. Deputies and officers stationed at the courthouse responded immediately, but they were initially outgunned. Arroyo's high-powered rifle gave him a lethal advantage over the pistols carried by law enforcement. Nearby, 52-year-old Mark Allen Wilson, a former firearms instructor and gun enthusiast, was in his apartment when the gunfire broke out. From his window, he could see the attack unfold. Without hesitation, he armed himself with his Colt .45 caliber pistol and ran to the scene. Wilson saw Arroyo aiming at his wounded son and took the opportunity to act. From approximately 50 feet away, Wilson fired and struck Arroyo in the back, causing him to stumble. Although the bullet did not penetrate Arroyo's body armor, the distraction may have spared David Jr.'s life. Wilson took cover and continued to exchange fire with Arroyo. In the ensuing gunfight, Wilson was eventually shot and fell behind Arroyo's truck. Arroyo walked up to him and, in full view of bystanders, fired 3 more shots at close range, killing Wilson. Witnesses were horrified by the execution-style killing. As police reinforcements arrived, Arroyo fled the scene in his truck. The high-speed pursuit that followed involved multiple officers from the Tyler Police Department and the Smith County Sheriff's Office. Arroyo continued to fire at pursuing officers through his rear window. Among those injured during the initial attack was Deputy Sherman Dollison, who was hit 5 times, sustaining life-threatening injuries to his liver, lungs, and legs. 2 other officers, Lieutenant Marlon Sewell and Detective Clay Parrott, suffered minor wounds. The pursuit ended on Highway 271 North. Deputy John Smith, attempting to stop Arroyo, used his patrol vehicle to ram the truck. Arroyo exited his vehicle and attempted to shoot again, but Sergeant Rusty Jacks, acting as a trained sniper, took the opportunity to end the confrontation. Firing 5 rounds from his AR-15 rifle, Jacks struck Arroyo in the back of the head, killing him instantly. In total, 3 people lost their lives that day: Maribel Estrada, Mark Wilson, and the perpetrator, David Arroyo Sr. 4 others were injured. The incident, captured on video and widely reported, sparked national discussions about courthouse security, active shooter responses, and the dangers of family disputes escalating into public tragedy. Mark Wilson was widely honored for his bravery. The Texas House passed a resolution recognizing his actions, and his efforts were credited with preventing an even greater loss of life. A public funeral and memorial service were held in his memory, with many in Tyler remembering him as a generous man who gave his time and money to local causes. For those who survived, the consequences were lasting. Deputy Dollison, although he recovered, required a kidney transplant years later. David Jr., whose attempt to reconcile his parents ended in tragedy, continued to live with the trauma of that day. The Smith County Courthouse eventually closed its east entrance to the public and increased law enforcement firepower to prevent future incidents where officers could be outgunned. In 2024, the courthouse was demolished. Although the city is ready to build anew, the scars of that February morning remain. For those who were there, the sounds of gunfire and the images of loss are not easily forgotten. On the morning of November 29, 2017, the halls of the International Criminal Tribunal for the Former Yugoslavia, or ICTY, in The Hague, were filled with quiet anticipation. Among the 6 Bosnian Croat defendants present for the final appeal judgments was 72-year-old Slobodan Praljak, a former war general, engineer, and theater director. Years of international litigation were drawing to a close. What followed would leave the courtroom in shock, casting a pall over the tribunal's final day and raising troubling questions that remain unanswered. Praljak had voluntarily surrendered to the ICTY in 2004 and had spent over a decade in detention. In 2013, he was convicted of war crimes committed during the Croat-Bosniak War between 1992 and 1994. The tribunal found him guilty of failing to prevent or punish the brutal mistreatment of Bosniak civilians by troops under his command. The charges included crimes against humanity, persecution, destruction of property, and the targeting of international personnel. His leadership during events such as the destruction of Mostar's Old Bridge and the operation of the Dretelj camp, where detainees were mistreated and in some cases killed, was central to the prosecution's case. Despite these findings, Praljak consistently denied criminal responsibility. He had stepped down from his military roles prior to some of the worst destruction and argued that others were accountable. Nonetheless, on November 29, 2017, the appeals chamber of the ICTY upheld his 20-year sentence. At that moment, Praljak stood, declared his rejection of the verdict, and raised a small vial to his lips. He drank its contents in full view of the judges and the courtroom. Seconds later, he announced that he had taken poison. The scene turned chaotic. Presiding Judge Carmel Agius halted proceedings as security rushed to intervene. Medical personnel were called, curtains were drawn, and the courtroom was sealed. Praljak was transported urgently to a nearby hospital in The Hague, but efforts to save him were unsuccessful. He was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. An autopsy later confirmed that he had ingested potassium cyanide, which caused acute heart failure. The courtroom was declared a crime scene. Dutch authorities immediately launched an investigation into how a high-risk detainee had obtained and smuggled poison into a heavily secured international tribunal. Though security procedures at the ICTY included item checks and visual inspections, chemical analysis was not routinely conducted. Some experts suggested that the poison could have been disguised as medicine or passed undetected during supervised visits. The tribunal's detention unit allowed relatively open movement among inmates during the day and offered conjugal and personal visits, leaving several potential avenues for the substance's introduction. The incident occurred during the final days of the ICTY's operation. It cast a shadow over the court's closing moments and dominated international headlines. Broadcast live, Praljac's defiant act was witnessed in real time across the Balkans, where responses were sharply divided. While many condemned his wartime actions, others, particularly within Croatia, honored him as a national figure. A public memorial service held in Zagreb drew more than 2,000 people, including political officials and members of Croatia's ruling party. Tributes, candles, and flowers appeared in cities across Croatia and Bosnia. International reactions were mixed. Croatian Prime Minister Andrej Plenković expressed condolences and criticized the verdict as a moral injustice, while the ICTY and its supporters emphasized the importance of upholding accountability for wartime atrocities. Praljac's death highlighted the deep divisions that persist over the legacy of the Bosnian War and exposed the emotional weight of reconciliation and justice in the post-conflict region. On the morning of December 31, 2024, something unsettling unfolded behind the locked doors of a quiet Georgia courthouse. The building was supposed to be still. No hearings, no sessions, no crowds, just the close of a chapter in local judicial service. But as daylight broke over Effingham County, the courthouse would become the center of a sudden and unexpected disruption. At its heart was Judge Stephen Yeckel, a man marking what should have been the last day of a long and respected legal career. Stephen was no stranger to public service. After being admitted to the Georgia Bar in 1976, he served as an assistant district attorney in Chatham County and held roles in the state's alcohol and tobacco tax unit and the Cobb County District Attorney's Office. His career spanned more than 45 years, during which he earned a reputation as a principled advocate and a man of the people, according to his half-brother. In 2022, he was appointed as a judge to the State Court of Effingham County. There he presided over criminal and civil matters with professionalism and a quiet sense of duty. He was also a father of four, a respected community member, and a figure many believed would continue to serve with distinction. But 2024 had been a challenging year for Stephen. In June, he lost his re-election bid to Judge Melissa Calhoun following a runoff election marked by very low voter turnout. Concerned about the legitimacy of the outcome, Stephen wrote to Governor Brian Kemp, criticizing the process and expressing that the office of state court judge was too significant to be decided by just 6% of the eligible population. He submitted a formal resignation request to the governor in early December, asking to step down a day before the end of his term. Governor Kemp, however, rejected the resignation, stating it would be inappropriate to override the result of a valid democratic process. Judge Calhoun had already been sworn in on December 19th, preparing to take office on January 1st. In the early hours of December 31st, Stephen sent a final message to Governor Kemp that read, "Now they will have to appoint someone." Sent at approximately 2:18 a.m., the email appeared to reference the political and legal implications of succession. It suggested a deep sense of frustration, possibly with how his resignation had been handled or with the structure of the judicial appointment process. His words were cryptic, yet carried weight. Later that morning, a sheriff's deputy discovered Stephen's body inside his chambers. Authorities confirmed he had died from what appeared to be a self-inflicted gunshot wound. While court was not in session that day, the event cast a heavy shadow over what was meant to be a peaceful transition. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation was tasked with conducting the autopsy and assisting in the inquiry. The courthouse was immediately closed and declared a scene under investigation. Counseling services were made available to staff through a crisis response team, and all county buildings closed early in response to the tragedy. Stephen's death shocked the community. His family, overwhelmed by grief, asked for privacy and requested that donations be made to charities working to prevent people from taking their own lives. His daughter acknowledged the outpouring of support and emphasized how humbled they were by the community's compassion. His half-brother, speaking to the press, described Stephen's passing as incomprehensible, saying it felt completely out of character for a man who had always been composed and resilient. In the days that followed, tributes poured in from across the legal and civic landscape. The Effingham County Board of Commissioners issued a statement expressing deep sorrow, and Governor Kemp's office extended thoughts and prayers. Though Stephen's final actions remain difficult to fully understand, his decades of public service and the impact he had on those around him will not be forgotten.